In many cultures around the world, the concept of a curse or hex has been treated as a supernatural force that brings misfortune to those targeted. Traditionally, people believed that when someone cast a curse, through ritual, words, or intense emotion, they could manipulate the unseen forces of the universe to cause harm. However, modern interpretations rooted in neuroscience and psychology have begun to reframe this phenomenon in a new light. Rather than external magical forces, curses might instead be internal processes, unconscious self-programming triggered by negative words, experiences, or suggestions. When someone is told repeatedly that they are unlucky, incompetent, or doomed to fail, the brain doesn't simply hear these words as meaningless sound. Especially when spoken by someone with emotional authority, like a parent, teacher, or even a stranger during a moment of vulnerability, the brain absorbs the message and stores it as a cognitive imprint. Over time, this imprint forms a part of the individual's unconscious belief system. This is where the concept of self-suggestion comes into play. Even if the individual consciously rejects the statement, their subconscious may internalize it as truth, subtly guiding their behavior and perception to align with that belief. Neuroscience reveals that the human brain is incredibly plastic. It adapts and reshapes itself in response to repeated stimuli. This is the foundation of neuroplasticity. When someone receives negative input, like being told, "You'll never be successful," or "Bad things always happen to you," the neural pathways associated with self-doubt, fear, and anxiety become stronger. Each time the person experiences failure or fear, those pathways are reinforced, creating a loop that feels like destiny. This can manifest as a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more one believes they are cursed or doomed, the more likely they are to interpret neutral or random events as confirmation of that belief. This concept ties closely with the psychological principle of confirmation bias. People unconsciously seek out evidence that supports their existing beliefs and ignore or discount evidence that contradicts them. If someone believes they are cursed, they may overlook moments of luck or success and instead focus intensely on every negative experience, thereby strengthening their belief in the curse. Their brain is essentially filtering reality in a way that aligns with their internal programming. Furthermore, the limbic system, which includes the amygdala and hippocampus, plays a central role in processing emotion and memory. Traumatic or emotionally intense moments tend to be stored more vividly in the brain. If a so-called curse is delivered during a moment of emotional vulnerability, such as a breakup, a death, or a public failure, the emotional weight of that experience causes the message to be stored with greater impact. Later in life, similar situations can trigger emotional flashbacks or subconscious behaviors based on that programming, reinforcing the sense of being cursed without any magical intervention at all. It's also important to consider how language shapes thought. Linguistic relativity suggests that the structure of the language we speak affects the way we think and perceive the world. Negative language, whether internal, self-talk, or external, others' words, can alter perception and emotional state. If someone grows up in an environment where phrases like "you're worthless," "you're cursed," or "nothing ever goes right" are common, they may begin to unconsciously adopt that worldview. Their internal narrative becomes saturated with those ideas, and their behavior shifts to match them. They might stop taking risks, avoid opportunities, or sabotage their own progress, all because of internalized, unchallenged belief systems. Moreover, modern research into hypnosis and suggestion supports the idea that the subconscious mind is highly suggestible. A skilled hypnotist can induce behavioral changes by speaking directly to a person's subconscious, bypassing critical thinking. In everyday life, this happens not in a therapist's office, but in everyday conversations, especially when the listener is emotionally open or in a vulnerable state. A statement made casually by someone else, "You'll never make it," might bypass conscious defenses and plant itself like a seed in the subconscious, where it quietly influences actions and choices for years. All of this leads to the idea that what we call a curse might not be a mystical attack, but rather a deeply embedded script in the subconscious mind. The curse lives not in the outer world, but in the internal narratives, beliefs, and fears that shape how we interact with reality. The emotional and psychological weight of these experiences can be so strong that they mimic the effects of a supernatural curse, misfortune, repetition of negative patterns, and the feeling of being trapped in a doomed fate. This interpretation doesn't make the experience of being cursed any less real or serious. On the contrary, it reveals just how powerful the mind is in shaping experience and outcome. A negative belief system can affect physical health, relationships, career, and personal growth. In this way, the brain becomes both the recipient and the transmitter of the curse, one that can be passed down generationally or culturally, and one that can operate completely below the surface of conscious awareness. Understanding curses as unconscious self-programming leads to an important realization. If the brain can create the illusion of a curse, it can also unlearn it. This opens the door to healing and liberation through conscious awareness, cognitive restructuring, and emotional processing. What was once interpreted as an inescapable fate can, with effort and support, be reprogrammed into a healthier and more empowering belief system. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, one of the most effective psychological approaches for dealing with negative thought patterns, is essentially a method of decursing the mind. CBT helps individuals identify and challenge distorted beliefs that cause emotional suffering. For example, if someone believes they are unlucky or cursed, CBT encourages them to examine evidence for and against this belief and to replace it with a more rational perspective. Over time, the brain's neural pathways begin to change, weakening the old curse script and reinforcing healthier, more constructive thought patterns. Another tool in this deprogramming process is mindfulness. Mindfulness teaches people to observe their thoughts and emotions without judgment. By doing so, individuals can become aware of unconscious programming as it arises. Instead of reacting automatically, they gain the ability to pause, reflect, and choose a different response. This conscious awareness is the first step in reclaiming control over the narratives that shape our lives. In this way, mindfulness becomes a kind of modern-day spiritual shield, not against outside forces, but against the internal echoes of harmful suggestions planted in the past. Moreover, positive suggestion and visualization can reverse the effects of negative self-programming. Athletes, performers, and entrepreneurs often use these techniques to mentally rehearse success, resilience, and confidence. When practiced consistently, these techniques can help rewire the brain. The same neuroplasticity that once trapped a person in a curse can now be used to free them. The key is repetition, emotional engagement, and belief. Just as a powerful negative message can shape fate, so too can a positive one. There is also a social dimension to this concept. Family systems, cultural narratives, and even entire societies can transmit unconscious curses through generational trauma or collective belief. For example, if a family passes down a belief that our family is always poor or we always suffer, these ideas can act as inherited self-programming. Even without any malicious intent, such beliefs are absorbed by children who grow up unconsciously carrying those patterns into adulthood. Breaking these patterns requires not only personal work, but sometimes also confronting family or cultural legacies. Healing from such unconscious programming often involves a blend of self-reflection, education, therapy, and in some cases, symbolic rituals. While traditional rituals may have been seen as mystical practices to remove curses, they can also be understood as psychological tools. A ritual, when performed with intention, can provide closure, create emotional release, and symbolically mark the end of a harmful belief. Whether it's writing a letter and burning it, creating art, or participating in a communal ceremony, these actions can serve as powerful signals to the subconscious that the old story no longer holds power. It's also essential to acknowledge that some people may cling to the belief in being cursed as a form of identity or explanation for suffering. While this belief can offer a sense of meaning or protection from deeper emotional pain, it can also limit growth. Helping such individuals shift their perspective requires compassion, patience, and support, not dismissal. The goal is not to invalidate their experience, but to gently guide them toward a more empowering understanding of their inner world. From a neuroscientific standpoint, the brain is a meaning-making machine. It constantly interprets events, connects patterns, and searches for narratives that make sense of experience. In the absence of clear explanations, the mind may attribute repeated suffering or misfortune to a curse. But once we understand the brain's tendency to internalize suggestion, reinforce belief through experience, and filter reality through emotion, we begin to see that curses are often misunderstood internal feedback loops. This doesn't mean that external influence has no power. Far from it. Words, energy, and emotion shared by others can deeply affect us, especially in childhood or traumatic situations. But instead of viewing these influences as supernatural forces, we can see them as triggers for deeply embedded psychological responses. In doing so, we empower ourselves to take back control. We move from being victims of invisible forces to active participants in rewriting our own scripts. Ultimately, the reinterpretation of curses as unconscious self-programming is a call to greater self-awareness and responsibility. It invites us to examine the beliefs we carry, not just those we chose, but those we inherited, absorbed, or were conditioned to believe. By shedding light on the subconscious patterns that shape our lives, we gain the power to change them. The curse, in this view, is not something that needs to be broken by a shaman or priest, but something that can be rewritten by the self through conscious effort, emotional healing, and a commitment to transformation. In this way, modern neuroscience doesn't eliminate the mystery of ancient curses. It gives them a new dimension. It shows us that magic might not be found in rituals or spells, but in the incredible, adaptable, and mysterious power of the human mind itself.